good from the inside out. Better than your morning would feel without using our sense of the world to make sense of the world and world peace, inner and outer world peace through hell. Individual strength, baby. Good morning and welcome back to another episode of Pow Go On. My name is Herbie, and today is November 15th, 2022. It is Tuesday, November 15th, 2022, 9 a.m. Good morning. How the heck are you? How the heck are you? Welcome back to the Best Feeling Podcast, the Best Feeling Network, your only no-nonsense podcast with your host, Herbie, here on Pow Go On. Today is Tuesday, November 15th, 2022, which means it's a True Love Tuesday. Every Tuesday is a True Love Tuesday here on Pow Go On. You hear that? That's the sound of some good old body magic tricks we shall be doing today as we guide ourselves through this conversation, through this little morning conversation and chill out. We're going to have a little chill out session, little conversation session. And are we just going to leave you high and dry throughout this conversation just listening? Or are we going to help you integrate with the surrounding areas around you, always remaining present in the moment, allowing us to blend? You heard me. I said allowing us to blend into the symphony that is your life all around you. Whatever you're hearing, whether you are hearing people speaking around you, whether you are chewing bubblegum, whether you are eating food, whatever you are doing, whenever you are, wherever you are, whether you're watching us live here at the premiere or whether you're watching us out there in the future in a video on demand, a VOD, like on YouTube or something. You you time traveler, you beautiful time traveler, you. Welcome. Every Tuesday here on Pow Go On, we shall be discussing the relationship between the two sexes. That is a True Love Tuesday. Every day on Pow Go On, we are discussing the relationship between ourselves and other things and other concepts. And on True Love Tuesdays, we are discussing the relationship between ourselves and the sexes. I hope you're remembering to listen to the front of the shins as discussed last week. I hope you're remembering to leave those swallowing muscles alone as we discussed yesterday. Leave the swallowing muscles alone. Yesterday was a Mover Monday. We introduced the body map concept that we shall be discussing in length throughout the week. This week we talk about leaving the swallow muscles alone. Why? Well, in this simulation of ours in which you die every 5 minutes, but that timer is reset with every breath that you take. We invite you to hold your controller properly with us today alongside our morning conversation. And how do we hold our controller properly today? How do we hold our controller properly today? By pretending that there is a candle, a lit candle, just flickering in front of your lips. Just a lit candle, just flickering there right in front of your lips. And you're not thinking about inhaling or exhaling necessarily, but simply that there is a lit candle in front of your lips that you are thus trying to not put out. It's just like a birthday candle, just flickering in front of your lips, wherever you are, whether you're sitting down in the sun, whether you are sitting down in front of a computer, whether you are sitting down talking to your friends, whether you are all alone. We invite you to pretend that there's a candle just flickering in front of your lips like a birthday candle that you're just trying to not put out. You're not thinking about inhaling or exhaling necessarily. But simply that there is a lit candle flickering in front of your lips. And how does if we observe our sense of self, how does that feel for you? As we observe our sense of self, how does that feel for you? Sense of self is in what? Sense of self. How do we observe our sense of self? Well, as in, like, your right eye kind of feels different than your left eye when you close your eyes, or how your left arm feels evidently different than your right arm, and how your left fingers feel different from your right fingers. And how do you know that? Well, we have a sense of self that even when we close our eyes, we can perceive ourselves and its relationship to ourselves, as in, is your left arm in front of your right arm or is it behind? Is your right hand touching your left leg? What have you? Your sense of self. How does your sense of self feel? If you embark us, if you entertain us by pretending that there's a candle in front of your lips that you're trying to not put out. Just a flickering candle that you're trying to not put out. Not thinking about inhaling or exhaling. And how the heck are you, as we observe our sense of self, to stretch our self-awareness like a muscle every morning, to feel so good throughout and be so rewarded for simply observing our sense of self? How are you wherever you are? I hope you're doing fantastic. It is a Tuesday. Today on True Love Tuesday here on Palgoan, we shall be discussing friction. As in, what are we? What are we, these human beings? We are the friction created from the two sexes. We as the human race are products of both sexes, both at the individual level, the pregnancy that it takes to birth you, get a bird's eye view of your birthing you. As humans in the human race, we are products of both sexes, both at the individual level, like getting pregnant and then birthing you, but also at the cultural level. We are the products of both sexes. Now, all decisions aren't just about sex, but all things are about the relationship between the two sexes. And that's because this relationship between the two sexes is the relationship that creates life. It creates life. Life as in the feeling of being full of life, but also this relationship between the two sexes is what creates the living bodies that will eventually have the potential to feel such a feeling. It creates the relationship between the two sexes is what creates the bodies that are even able to experience all of these feelings, good or bad. It is the relationship between the two sexes that creates the bodies that get to experience this thing that we call life, including the feeling of being full of life. The bodies that can actually feel that are created through the relationship of these two sexes. Any individual sex, male or female individually alone? No, but the relationship between the two. Are all decisions made based on trying to get sex? No, but rather an integration or an understanding or an awareness of the relationship between the two sexes and what it is responsible for, which is everything. We hear a lot about how you can't have an opinion on this. You can't have an opinion on that because you are not that, or you cannot have an opinion on this or that. But that's a lie. That is the lie that we are told in this generation. You're not allowed to have an opinion on this or that. If you're a male, you can't have an opinion on females. If you're a female, you can't have an opinion on males. But that is the big fat lie. We are generated from the relationship between both male and female. We are generated from the relationship between the two, like the friction that is created by rubbing your left and right hands together or your left and right knees together. The friction that is created does not just exist by itself, but rather the interaction between those two objects. We are more closer to the friction or the heat that is created from the relationship between those two sexes rather than just being any one of those individual sexes alone. Not just at a cultural level and a spiritual level, but at a physical individual level. You are literally created by the relationship between these two sexes when two of them decide to become one flesh and meet in the middle. The friction, the heat they create, the result of those two sexes rubbing together physically and metaphorically is what creates not just the spirit of life, but actual physical bodies that then do go on to search and search and search their entire life for that feeling of being full of life. Everything good that had made it thus far, hundreds of thousands of years after humans have first become a thing on this planet, everything good that has made it this far, that you can understand, that you can experience, that you love, everything that has made it thus far is from the relationship, is from this relationship between the males and the females. Every civilization rises due to their well-ordered relationship, or every civilization rises due to a well-ordered understanding or a better ordered understanding of the relationship between the two sexes. And every civilization eventually falls due to whether or not their understanding of this relationship is ordered or not. Whether or not it is ordered. As in ordered closer to the truth. The closer to the truth we get to any truth, the better we function in freedom alongside that truth. Kind of like how recognizing that gravity exists and becoming very familiar with the relationship between yourself and gravity allows you to perform complex tasks like moving yourself around the world, tossing a trash into a trash bin, bringing that water bottle up to your mouth, drinking water. Understanding the flow of water requires a deep understanding and familiarity with the order of gravity. So shall we order our understanding closer to the truth of gravity, we shall move with better freedom, more pleasure in life as we work with gravity and not against it. Similar to our relationship with gravity, should we understand the relationship between the two sexes, not because we are any different, but rather because we are one in the same. Male and female are the same spirit, set apart by two flesh. Flesh that's not even actually that different. Why should we care? Why? Because we should care about... Why should we care about the relationship between the two sexes? If every civilization rises due to this relationship and eventually dies due to this relationship or their understanding of it, why then? Why should we care? Because we should care about what people do in their individual lives, physically or emotionally, to satisfy themselves? Yes. Yes. We should care about what people do in their private lives. Now, should we care about the intimate details? Do we have to know every single intimate detail about what people are doing in their individual lives? Should we go out of our way to disrupt their way of living? Should we be angry? Of course not. Of course not. We are all the same spirit seeing freedom. We are all the same spirit seeking freedom from pain. Why? Not why. How? How could you even be angry if we are all the same? No, you never have a right to be angry, but you should care to strengthen your worldview and enact it in your own life to get yourself the good that you want. In your private life, in your conscientious life of how much you care about the world, in your relationship life and how you treat others. Yes, we should care about what people do in their individual lives. We shouldn't hate them. We shouldn't have to disrupt their lifestyle. We shouldn't see ourselves as other than them, but we should care about what people do in their individual lives and how they are ordering their worldview to the world. Why? We should care about what's right, even in people's lives that are not your own lives. We should care about what's right. What's right should matter to you because all things are about this relationship between both of the sexes. We should care about what's right because all things are about this relationship between the two sexes. Every civilization rises due to their proper ordered understanding of the relationship between the two sexes, and then eventually falls if their understanding of the relationship between the two sexes becomes unordered. Why? Because everything is about the relationship between the two sexes. We are one. Although we are two sexes, we are one, set apart by two flesh. Set apart by flesh. Our flesh being different, yet we inhabit the same spirit, same motivation for good for the race, because what's good for all is good for thee. What's good for all is good for thee. We should care about what people do in their private lives. We shouldn't try to interrupt. We shouldn't disrupt. We shouldn't hate. And we never have a right to be angry. But we should care as we develop our own working worldview that we enact in our own lives. Life is already so difficult as it is, let alone denying ourselves the permission to look outside of the world to try to enrich our own worldview in our personal lives. It just so happens that enriching your own personal life ends up getting you what you want and helping the entire world anyway. Doesn't that sound kind of paradoxical? Maybe, but humans kind of are that way. In this chaotic life we live in. We should care. We We shouldn't see ourselves as responsible for handling every situation out there. But we should care as we develop this proper, mature, and ordered worldview in which we are all the same. So looking at others without looking at others and understanding the human spirit by looking at others, I mean, life is already hard enough as it is, and we're going to make it even harder by denying ourselves the use of our own senses of the world to make sense of the world. That doesn't make sense in the world. We should care because we all are. We should care because all we are, everything we know as the humans, all we are, all we have, all we know was because of the relationship between the two sexes. Even language would not have made it this far were it not for the understanding or the seeking of understanding of the relationship between the two sexes. Is it that everything we do is dependent, or is it that everything we do is orienting towards getting ourselves laid? Not necessarily. Just because we haven't found a better way to feel good from the inside out, better than sex, so we're gonna lean on that because that seems like the easiest pathway for now, because we've lost sight of being able to feel good from the inside out independent of anyone else. But isn't that true freedom? Feeling so good from the inside out independent from someone else. And it just so happens to achieve that freedom, all you gotta do is recognize truths that are closer to the actual truth, order our awareness of the actual truths around us. And one of the most main true things around us is that everything is built off of the relationship between the two sexes. Literally, metaphorically, spiritually. Not because all we want to do is get lost in the other sex, but rather because that relationship is what creates all we know. That is the life. That is our life. Created not just through the relationship between the two sexes, but because life is finite, also through the understanding and the dance with this relationship between the two sexes. Life is finite. Life is short. Life is limited. And so to have most freedom in life, all one must do to reach freedom in life, all one must do is observe the truths closer to the order of the world. How do we get that freedom in this life that we have, that we want so bad? Well, simply integrating with the truth. And that all we know, everything we even know, anything we know, is about the relationship between the two sexes, because those are the two sexes of the race. That is life itself, physically, literally, as in it creates life when a male and a female join together in physical sex. Not only does that create the life that is here to enjoy all this life-loving feeling, but that is life itself. That is all we know about the human struggle. That is all we know about the human condition, is that we are the same, set apart into two different flesh. We are not individually just one sex or the other, but rather the friction that is created from the interaction between the two, the relationship between the two sexes. We'll be right back after this short break, but only if you remember that there's a candle in front of your lips that you're trying to not put out. Be right back. You're on Pago One. gummies that claim they're going to be boosting your mental capabilities, your physical performance, your behaviors in life? Tried them and then felt motivated yet slightly confused and cautious? I mean, are the effects even real or are they a placebo? Are you achieving what you think you are achieving, or is it imagination? Do you have all this energy now, or is that imagination too? Be done with placebos. Be done with uncertainty. Isn't it so draining to be uncertain? You can't even begin to gain confidence in what you're doing. How about some actionable, specific advice instead? Take this gummy, feel the front of your shins. Bam! That one's free. Take Padawan with you wherever you go, whenever you go, and feel so good from the inside out. Feeling so good from the inside out. Better than your morning would feel without. Using our sense of the world to make sense of the world. Why? For inner and outer world peace through individual strength. Welcome back to the Best Feeling Podcast, the Best Feeling Network, your only no-nonsense podcast. I'm your host, Herbie. Welcome back from that short break. Today is Tuesday, which means on Padawan, it is a true love Tuesday. Welcome back. Today we are talking about friction and how we are the friction generated from the relationship between the two sexes. We are not simply one sex alone, but rather created from the friction between the friction that is created from the relationship between the two sexes. We are created from that, and thus every future creation is created from that, the relationship between the two sexes. And thus, yes, it is our concern. Every part of the relationship between the two sexes, although we are set apart into two different flesh, we are all the same purpose. And so, although we are responsible for one role at a time in this lifetime, we are inherently concerned with the relationship between the two sexes. Down to our origin. We are concerned about the relationship between the two sexes. In this day and age, you're constantly told you can't have an opinion on that, you can't have an opinion on this, but yes, you can. That is the big lie, that you can't have an opinion on this or that. You can have an opinion on anything you want. Now, should you hate or judge, or do you have any right to be angry ever? Of course not. But you have the right to discern and understand, or seek to understand truth in the world. Why? So that you may align closer to the truth in your personal life, so you can see the good that you want in your own personal life, not just so that you can feel morally superior over others or to virtue signal, but rather it does actually have applicable application. It actually does. It actually is imperative. It is actually good for you to seek truth in the world, so that you may sit more comfortably in the order that is the world and relax and make less stressful choices in life. They say you can't have an opinion on this, you can't have an opinion on that. Because you are not male, you are not female. You cannot have an opinion on this and that. But that is the big lie. As you are allowed to have an opinion on anything that you want. You are allowed to have an opinion on everything that you want. Does that give you the right to be angry? No, you never have the right to be angry. Should we go around judging? No, you shouldn't go around judging. Does that mean you should go out of your way to try to change people's individual lives? Of course not. Does that mean that you should go out and be angry, although you have an opinion on whatever you want? Does that give you the right to be angry about what you're seeing? Of course not. I hope you are allowing all these words to go in one ear, bam, and then out the other, bam. As we are running through some nice words today and feeling so good and feeling so rewarded for it. Those some neck cracks, you know, do some body realignments. In this simulation of ours in which we die every 5 minutes, but that timer is reset with a breath that we take. We hope that you will join us as we invite you to pretend that there is a candle in front of your lips that you're trying to not put out. Look at me struggling over here. Again, we invite you to pretend that there's a candle in front of your lips that you're trying to not put out. It's just a flickering candle. When you're not thinking about inhaling necessarily, you're not thinking about exhaling necessarily, but simply that there's a candle in front of your lips that you're trying to not put out. Wherever you are, whenever thou art, whether you are joining us here live here on Tuesday, November 15th, 2022, or whether you're out there in the future somewhere, you beautiful time traveler, you, welcome back to a True Love Tuesday here on Pal Go On. Today we're talking about friction. Welcome back. We're talking about friction. We are the friction between the two sexes here on True Love Tuesday. We are the friction that is created from the two sexes. The souls of us created from the friction of the two sexes, although we inhabit one of the sexes at a time. Our souls, our spirits, our motivations, our attitudes are generated from the friction between the two sexes. As in our relationship between the two sexes, as in the two sexes is all we know, and that's a good thing, is all we know about our lives, our human race, our destiny, our human civilization, our human experience. All we know are the two sexes. And we know that both parties or people who, and we know that males and females hold up. Yeah, that feels good. We know that both males and females can concern themselves with manly things or feminine things. Of course. Although you are male, you might be a man, but can identify with feminine things. You might be a woman who can identify or understand manly things. Yet we are thrust into our physical forms, our biology. And so by nature of, or by virtue of our biology, we're naturally concerned with one side of the equation or the other side of the equation. We are the same spirit, the same motivation, the same attitudes. We are generated from the relationship between the two sexes. Contrary to what people will have you believe, the minimum amount of things to get to know, the minimum amount of things it takes to know if something exists is not one. It's not a single dot it's not a single dot like one piece of existence that's needed to know if something exists or not. If you had just one dot and no space around it, you would not know what is that dot and what is not that dot. The minimum amount of things it takes to know if one thing exists is not just one. It's not just this dot floating in space, like male, that's a male, or female, that's a female. It's just like floating in space, nothing to compare it to. It would just be a giant screen of black if you were just identifying this dot. It would just be this dot that is all encompassing and nothing is not that dot. You wouldn't be able to identify that dot. You wouldn't be able to know if that dot exists if it wasn't for everything that is not that dot that also shapes that dot. It's not a single dot, one piece of existence that's needed to know if something exists or not. It's not one. It's two. You need that thing and something else that is not that thing. You need that dot And then you need that whole chart that is not that dot to be able to identify, distinguish what that dot even is. You need all of what that is not that dot to also give the identity of what that dot is. All the space around it is what gives that dot identity. All the space around that dot is what gives that dot identity by showing what is not that dot. Just as much as that dot gives itself identity just by existing, that space around that dot also gives shape to what that dot is, and vice versa. In fact, you might say they give each other their shape. This dot and whatever is not that dot. This male and whatever is not that male. This female and whatever is not that female. This human and whatever is not that human. This dot and whatever is not that dot in existence. Whatever that thing is that you're trying to understand about cannot be that thing without everything else that is not that thing. Sort of like the yin yang, which we as humans represent. Just like the yin yang, the dot and what is not that dot. Men and women draw their identity from one another as well in a similar fashion. 2 being the minimum, the most concise amount of beings required to observe itself. As in, you cannot observe that dot if there was everything else that is not that dot. You need that space around the dot, everything that is not that dot, to see what that dot is clearly. To be able to observe even what that dot is, you must see everything that that dot is not. In order to identify what that dot is, what that shape of that dot even is. Otherwise, it's just a dot encompassing everything. And you have nothing to compare it to, so is it black or is the space around it black? Who knows? Everything is that thing, so there is no difference. And so it's impossible to identify what that thing is without everything that it is not. Men and women are no more different than this. Just like the yin yang, we embody the same space, but yet we need 2 of us to be able to even understand what ourselves are. This dot is like, I want to know what I look like. Well, if that dot is everywhere all the time and is all things, you can't know what that dot is, as it has nothing to distinguish it from anything else. So is this really a concept or one thing you're looking at, or possibly is your awareness missing the picture then? If it has nothing to be able to compare it to, it's just floating in this gigantic space, but it is the space that it's floating in. Okay, so what are you even distinguishing? It's just everything. But no, in fact, in order to be able to observe a thing, for that thing to be able to know that it exists, it must know that it exists separate from other things, so that it knows that it is. Otherwise, it's just everything, and then you're just describing multiple things. But in order for one thing to be able to observe even itself, there must be 2 things, that thing and that which it is not, to be able to shape what that thing is in your head. To have an understanding of what that thing is, you must know its boundaries, where it stops, what it is not. Like the yin yang. If the yin yang was just all the black color or all the white color, then it's just a round circle. No movement, no conversation, no call and response, no speak, listen. It's just that thing. There's no movement, there's no ability to create any kind of gravity. But with the polarity of the black and white occupying the same space, now they constantly demand this motion going back and forth between them. If yin and yang are like the universe, and like the yin or I forgot if it's like the black is the yin and the black is the yang, but if the black color in the yin and yang, if it did not have the white, you would just have a black dot. But instead you have the white in there, part of the same shape, and so you can identify where the black part ends and where the white part begins. The minimum amount to be able to describe itself or describe anything's identity to itself or to be able to observe anything is represented in the way that the yin and yang represents itself. The relationship between the yin and the yang represent the minimum amount of things it takes to understand a thing at all. To understand a thing at all, you need that thing and that which is not that thing. Could we be just a male? Could we be just a female? Could this race be just a male? Could it be just a female? Obviously not, as we are created from the friction between the two sexes. Why is the human race split into two sexes? Well, it's the minimum amount and the most efficient and concise amount of things that you need to be able to observe itself, to be able to understand what itself is. You need something that is what it is not. In order for the male's experience to be full and complete, I mean, obviously barring the obvious truth, which is that you need males and females to make a new human. That's obvious. But if we want to go even further, let's go deeper. If we want to go even deeper, the man and female, because they are made from this relationship between the men and the females, in order to even understand themselves as part of this entire design that created them. So in other words, to even understand themselves as they are themselves a product of the friction or the relationship between the two sexes, because you beautiful time traveler, you beautiful Padawan watcher, you out there wherever you are, letting us blend into the symphony of your life that is around you, because you are a product of the relationship between the two sexes, in order to better understand or to even have a holistic understanding of yourself at all, you must seek the truth and acknowledge the relationship between the two sexes, as you are a product of the relationship between the two sexes. And thus, to understand even yourself, you must understand the relationship between the two sexes, or seek to understand at least that, as you are a product of that. In fact, the human race is a product of that, which is why, in keeping in theme with learning more about ourselves and integrating ourselves and looking to be our most authentic selves, we look also to integrate what our nature is, how we got this far, the relationship between the two sexes. Now, does that mean does that mean your whole life is defined by wanting favor from the opposite sex, or possibly wanting to be hated by the opposite sex? Any specific spirit you have towards the opposite sex, is that what we're looking for? Or is it that our entire life, our experience is shaped by this relationship between the two sexes? Whether that be towards, as in you're doing well with the relationship between the two sexes, or whether that be because you still have many unanswered questions and are feeling a spiritual loss when it comes to understanding the opposite sex. Regardless, our entire experience is shaped by this relationship between the two sexes. You are a product of the relationship between the two sexes. So we seek to understand ourselves by understanding the relationship between the two sexes. And as it is the only thing that has got us thus far, is a proper understanding of a proper ordered understanding of the relationship between the two sexes. If you had an unordered understanding of the relationship between the two sexes, hundreds of thousands of years ago, I mean, which they definitely did, those civilizations fall, or never begin or they never begin to begin with. Having an unordered understanding of the relationship between the two sexes is the reason why civilizations fall, or fail to begin, or fail to even, what's the word I'm looking for? Start? Founded? Excuse me. Excuse me. Having an unordered view of the relationship between the two sexes is responsible for civilizations falling or for civilizations not even getting off their feet in the first place. Why? Because everything great, everything we know that is great, everything that takes time to make, generations to make, requires an ordered view of the relationship between the two sexes. Does that mean if someone in their individual lives has an unordered view of the relationship between the two sexes, does that mean that the individual and their unordered view of the relationship between the two sexes causes all these nations to fall in their because of these individual choices? Maybe. 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 But rather, the goodness that we seek, the goodness that people perform in their lives in order to achieve greatness, not just for themselves, but in the world, requires a proper ordered understanding of the relationship between the two sexes, not just to perform and perform acts that are in agreement with this relationship between the two sexes, but in order to have a peace of mind and a body spirit, a will within the body individually, one must align closer to the nature of the world, kind of like how we align closer to the nature of gravity in order to perform complex tasks in life, walking, running, creating businesses, creating families. We take for granted our relationship with this gravity, just as we take for granted our relationship to the understanding of the relationship between the two sexes. In order to have peace in the spirit, the mind, and the body, in order to perform great feats in your own private life, requires a kind of peace and willpower that only comes from integrating properly to the truth. That only comes from being able to understand this gravity, the setting, the context that we work in order to achieve most freedom. How much greatness will you be able to perform should you be trying to run against a tidal wave? However, should you understand which direction the tidal wave is going and learn to surf that tidal wave, are you not able to experience more freedom, pleasure, and have a great freaking time? Right? Great freaking time! Not by resisting the wave, but by riding the wave. We have a wave of gravity. We also have the wave of the relationship between the two sexes. That the reason why all good things even exist is because people were first created through the relationship of the two sexes, but then garnered for themselves a mature and proper understanding, a sophisticated understanding of the relationship between the two sexes, so that they may find themselves performing properly to that role, and thus riding the wave as opposed to trying to run against the tidal wave. Your biology gives you this tidal wave, as in we are this tidal wave of this relationship between the two sexes, created literally from sex between the two sexes. Created literally from sex between the two sexes, the relationship between the two sexes. But then as we are both male and female, neither of us got to choose, but we're thrust into this body. We are already part of this tidal wave, as your body is this gigantic tidal wave of just like insurmountable truth. Your body is the truth. It is the most true thing that you have, and that it is present here in the moment. It can be nowhere else. You are here now. You are not in the past. You are not in the future. You are here, right here and now, just like your body is. Your body's not in the past. Your body's not in the future. The most present and godly thing is what is here and right now. The only things you really can confirm, your past and your future, all in your imagination, right? And the imagination can be fickle and lie. But your body here and now is the most truthful and present, honest, godly thing there is that there is. And so we are not just the male or the female, but rather we're literally created from the friction between the two. And although we then will embody one component of this entire human race, although individually we may embody the physical component of one sex, we are the result of the relationship between the two sexes. So we are naturally inherently concerned about the relationship between the two sexes. Should they be agreeable or closer to the truth, we shall see thriving in culture, but also in your personal life. How could you see more thriving in your personal life by integrating closer to the truth of the nature of the universe, and that we are the friction that is generated from the relationship between the two sexes? How is it going to help in your personal life? Well, there are so many decisions that you're making in your life as we align ourselves, or as we dance in this symphony that is your life, as you allow these words to go in one ear and out the other, and as you allow us here on Power Go On to blend into that symphony, that beautiful symphony of your life, whether you were in a coffee shop or whether you were skydiving, whatever you were doing, whether you're snowboarding or you're skiing or you're just walking down the street, how does it affect your personal life? How does it affect your personal life to gain a deeper and more rich understanding of the relationship between the two sexes? Well, aren't there already so many things to do in life? Isn't life short? Isn't it finite? Don't we want to do so many different things? Aren't there so many decisions to make throughout even your daily life? Can't you make like infinite decisions? You could be like, I don't want to stand up. Or you could be like, I do want to stand up. Or you could be like, I do want to look to the left. Or I do want to look to the right. Or I do want to work on homework. Or I don't want to work on homework. Or I want to go to work. Or I don't want to go to work. Or I want to work on being upset. Or I want to like fix my body. Like all the motivations, all of the motivations and attitudes that we take in our lives, we can take any. It's like crazy how many choices you have to make, individual choices that you can make daily. And so what guides those choices so that we don't find ourselves in spiritual stagnation, find ourselves hating life because we're just like, there's too many decisions. I don't know which one to make. And when I do make a decision, I'm not confident about it. And then it leads me to suffering and I don't know how to deal with that suffering. And then you look back and you're like, should I have made those decisions at all? How do you guide yourself in those? How do you guide yourself? How do you watch yourself to make sure you're making decisions that you yourself will be happy with later? Because we know that suffering is so confusing. Suffering is so elusive, right? It like hides so much because there's some suffering that after the suffering is done, you find yourself in high spirits. You find yourself in euphoria. You're like, wow, that was a good, tough decision. I suffered a little bit, but I felt better after. And then there's other decisions where you're like, man, I suffered a lot. And like, now this sucks even more. How do we know which decisions to make when everything is hiding behind this wall of suffering? Which suffering will we take upon ourselves that will be worth it? Which sufferings do we take upon ourselves that would be worth it? How do we answer that question? Well, we answer it by getting closer to aligning ourselves towards riding these gigantic tidal waves that are already thrust upon us since birth, since the beginning of the conception of humankind at all. Gravity being the most obvious physical one. This crazy force that you just have to learn, that you just have to learn to ride, or this crazy force of gravity that you just have to learn to work with in order to achieve the greatness in your life, the greatness and good that you want in your life. You got to work with gravity. It's like a rule that's being placed onto you. This is a context that you live in. In a similar way, you got to work with the relationship between the two sexes. It's the context we live in. Not just in today's society, but how we got to today's society and why we're not still living in like ground holes and like molds in the ground and like sacrificing kids and like killing each other's like husbands and wives instead of actually doing where we are today, creating great institutions. We necessarily live in that context that if that context wasn't recognized, we would still be barely speaking languages. It is only because this context of gravity, of time moving one way, of us being the same human race, but individually split into one or the other role, as we are all the same race rolling towards the same goal of seeking freedom from pain, right? How do we achieve freedom? And how do we achieve peace in our individual lives? Not by trying to surf against the tidal wave that is gravity, that is time, that is the relationship between the two sexes, but rather to ride that wave as it is the context of gravity, as it is the context of the relationship between the two sexes. That you are not just created, but everything that you now hope for. All that you even hope for. All that you want, all that you desire, all that you think that you want, all that you think that you desire, all that brings you pain. All the fear of the future depends on the relationship between the two sexes. Does that mean that you're always fearing, oh, I'm not going to have sex? Not really. But rather, the relationship between the two sexes, as in seeing like, okay, are men strong? Okay, are women nurturing? Does that mean men can never be nurturing? Does that mean women can never be quote unquote strong? Of course not, because we are all the same spirit. We're all the same motivations of trying to seek freedom from pain, not just on an individual level, but on a spiritual and cultural level. We are all the same, simply split into two different flesh. What's good for one is good for the other. Men and women are not in competition with one another. We're like the yin and yang. We're no more in competition with one another than the yin is in competition with the yang. No, instead, they shape each other. They need each other. Literally to be created. Literally for you to be able to identify that that thing is a yin and yang, you must have the yin and the yang. Literally to identify that that is the human race, you must identify that, okay, that is made up of men and women. Not only do the men and women individually create more men and women, but then the world, that thing is now defined by the relationship between the men and women. Does that mean that they have to have sex all the time with every person? Or does it simply mean that the men and the women are defined by the relationship with one another? As in, is the yin acting like a yin? Is the yang acting like a yang? Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad. But it's all defined by that relationship. Sometimes you might lose trust in the men. Sometimes you might lose trust in the women. And so individually in our lives, we make different decisions because we view the other sex in a certain way. What is that if not the relationship between the two sexes? So as we are here today, deciding what we are, trying to seek freedom and authenticity in our lives, as it is so hard to make decisions in our lives because you can make a billion decisions. What decisions do you orient yourselves towards? Well, those that probably have a higher chance of success. How much success do you plan to have trying to surf against the tidal wave? Now, how much freedom and fun and pleasure and freedom from pain can you experience should you ride with the tidal wave? Instead of demanding that the tidal wave should not exist, how much freedom and pleasure and freedom from pain can you get from simply acknowledging that it exists? Not saying it shouldn't exist, as it already exists, this tidal wave, this gravity that we exist in, this context that we live in. How much freedom from pain and how much authenticity in your personal individual life can you get from surfing with this tidal wave? From seeking how to best ride your board on that tidal wave, as the tidal wave already exists. We are the product of the relationship between the two sexes. We are not simply one sex or the other. As we are trying to enrich our own personal individual lives, we are neither just the male or the female, although we are physically, as we embody those physically, we are generated from the relationship between the two. And so, should we want to understand ourselves better and have a more free and authentic life, all we must do is orient ourselves closer and align ourselves closer to the truth and seek how to align ourselves closer to the truth instead of being angry, which you never have a right to be angry, right? Instead of being angry, trying to resist this tidal wave, how much freedom and how much freedom from pain and how much freedom to be authentic and feel so good throughout life can we get by riding this tidal wave? By riding this tidal wave. By riding this tidal wave in which you are already one part of the entire equation. And we are generated from the relationship between these two equations. And so we know that in order to get the best for ourselves in our personal lives, we must seek to be better parts of that equation. As we know what is good for us, how do we get the best that's good for us? Will we get what's best good for us? How do we get what's best? How do we get what's best for us and what's good for us? Well, we identify what we are, which is the result of the relationship between the two sexes. We are the result, the friction. When the two sexes rub together, we are the friction that is generated from rubbing the two sexes together. That is what we are. So if we want what is good for us, we want what is good for the relationship of the two sexes. We want what's good for the relationship between the two sexes. We draw identity with one another just as much as we draw identity from not being one another. We draw identity from one another just as much as we draw identity from not being the other. Again, here on True Love Tuesday, as we discuss that we discuss friction. Now, what are we as a human race? What are we individually? We are the result of the friction between the relationship of the two sexes, the relationship of the two sexes being rubbed together throughout the rest of time. And as such, as we need two different objects to rub together to create that friction, we draw identity with one another by being this friction, just as much as we draw identity from not being one another, because you have to not be one another to create this friction, like electricity, to generate the energy which we are. To even generate that energy, you need two distinct individual parts, two hands to rub together, two knees to rub together to create this friction, which we are. We draw as much identity from one another, just as much as we draw identity from not being one another, male and female. And observing the differences between those two, like observing the differences between the yin and the yang, is godly. It is godly, not just on a world level, but on an individual life level, for your personal life to feel so good from the inside out, as you are making billions and infinity decisions every day. How do you know and how do you have confidence and security that you're making the right ones? Well, you orient yourself towards the larger truths so that you can ride this tidal wave and not feel like you're missing out. You make your decisions based on orienting closer to the truth, which is wanting a good relationship between the two sexes. As what comprises the entire human experience on a population level and on an individual level, what comprises the entire experience is the two sexes. And so the relationship between the two sexes is what decides the future of that race and is what will decide the future of you individually. Should you try to resist this wave and find yourself suffering and drowning, trying to resist the impossible, or trying to embark on the impossible task of resisting this tidal wave and swimming against it, even end up drowning. But in your individual life, should you want good, you should ride these tidal waves. What decisions should you make throughout your days to feel so confident? Well, you ride those tidal waves. You find and identify those tidal waves and ride those tidal waves. Let's be a good yin. Let's be a good yang. We are the friction created from the two. Observing the difference is godly. And with that, I want to thank you so much for being here. I hope you're remembering to place a candle in front of your lips that you're trying to not put out today. As we hold our controller properly wherever you are, whenever thou art. After discussing kind of a crazy topic, right? The world is saying you can't have an opinion on this, you can't have an opinion on that, you're not a male, you're not a female. Wrong! We are. We are. Physically, we embody one. Physically, we embody one. But attitudinally, spiritually, personality, purpose-wise, our desire to just have freedom from pain, we're all the same. All part of the same race. We would not be at all. We would not be at all if it was not for both, because we are the result of the relationship between both. Like the electricity is the relationship between moving electrons. Electrons moving from one place to the other. Heat being transferred from one to the other. This call and response is what actually creates us physically and also spiritually, our personality. The friction between the two sexes. These two parts required to make this entire whole. Two parts of the yin and yang required for that object to be considered a yin and yang. The man and female required for this race to be considered a human race and for it to survive longer than one generation. Thank you guys so much for being here. I hope you have a fantastic day. I hope you remember to feel the front of your shins. I hope you remember to leave your swallow muscles alone while you are singing and dancing today. If you sing and dance, I hope you notice your sense of self. I hope you observe your sense of self as you leave your swallowing muscles alone, consciously for now, but you'll notice an immediate and continuous improvement. We'll see you tomorrow on Warfare Wednesday, where we shall be discussing our relationship between ourselves and the outside world. Hope you have a fantastic day, being this beautiful result of the friction between the two sexes. And I hope you have a fantastic time seeking how you can be the best part of your part of the sexes. Because what's good for the relationship between the two sexes is good for you. See you tomorrow. My name is Herbie. This is Pagwan.